The envelope trembled in Daniel's hand, the paper shaking like a confession too heavy to hold. He whispered, "Ethan deserves this truth," though the silence around him argued otherwise. His chest burned as he tore open the letter, every fiber bracing for rejection. The ink bled with apology, words written for a brother left behind when survival once meant escape. Ethan's face lived in every sentence. The boy he abandoned turned into the man carrying resentment. Daniel thought, will he spit in my face, or let me back into his life? The kitchen clock ticked louder than his heart, time pressing down like a sentence not yet served. He remembered Ethan's childhood laugh, bright as summer, now likely a memory stained by absence. He said, "I left you when you needed me most," though no one sat across the table. The letter named the stake, dignity and forgiveness, or the final burial of brotherhood. Daniel folded it with trembling fingers, placed it into the worn envelope, and whispered, "Tonight, I pay my debt." A single thought cut deeper than the sharpest blade. Love may still live where resentment waits. The night air cut sharp as Daniel stepped outside, clutching the envelope like proof of life. He muttered, "Ethan deserves to see me, even if he slams the door." Streetlights flickered against cracked pavement, the neighborhood unchanged but colder. He traced paths of childhood walks, his feet dragging under the weight of memory. He thought of Ethan waiting somewhere, still hurt, still alive, perhaps sharpening words that would pierce deeper than knives. Daniel stopped at the corner where their father once waved them home, and whispered, "I was too weak back then." His heart pounded, each beat demanding he turn back, but the letter's presence chained him forward. He imagined Ethan's voice. Why now? The guilt pressed heavy, but behind it flickered hope, thin as smoke, yet still burning. Daniel reached Ethan's street, the houses lined like silent judges. He whispered, "Every step feels like a verdict." His boots scuffed against gravel, echoing too loud. A dog barked distantly, breaking silence, then fell quiet again. He stared at Ethan's house glowing faint under porch light, the same house where they grew up, now owned by his brother alone. His breath fogged in the night, heavy with doubt. What if he tears this letter before hearing me? Daniel asked the darkness. He remembered Ethan's last look. 15 years back, betrayal hardened into stone. Tonight he prayed for cracks. Daniel stood frozen at the gate, the metal cool under his palm. He said, "I'm not the man who left you." His knees trembled as he pushed it open, the squeak loud like protest. Porch steps rose before him, worn wood creaking under his weight. Each step echoed years of silence. He imagined Ethan inside, pacing, unaware of the storm about to knock. Daniel's chest rose and fell like a man walking into trial. He clutched the letter closer, whispering, "This is my sentence, this is my plea." Daniel raised his fist to knock, but hesitation froze him. He whispered, "Once I touch this door, there's no turning back." The silence mocked him, daring him to retreat. He thought of Ethan as a boy asking, "Why did you leave me?" and swallowed hard. He pressed his knuckles gently against the wood, then firmer, the sound echoing through the night. His heart thundered with the rhythm, louder than the knock itself. "Wait." He whispered again, "Please, let me in." The door opened slowly, and Ethan's eyes locked on Daniel like two storms colliding. Daniel whispered, "I didn't think you'd answer." Ethan's jaw clenched, silence filling the space where welcome should be. The years of abandonment were written in the lines across Ethan's face, every crease another scar Daniel caused. Ethan finally said, "You're late by 15 years. Daniel's grip tightened on the envelope, knuckles whitening as he whispered, "I came to tell you why I left." Ethan laughed bitterly, shaking his head. No reason fixes a brother's ghost. Daniel's chest sank under the weight of that truth. He thought of the nights Ethan must have waited, the birthdays without him, the shadows that must have followed his absence. Daniel said, "I want to be more than the mistake you remember." Ethan's eyes softened for a fleeting second, then hardened again. The silence grew heavy, each breath like breaking glass. Daniel thought, Forgiveness isn't free, but I'll pay whatever it costs. Ethan turned away, leaving the door half open, as if daring Daniel to follow. Daniel stepped inside, whispering, "This house still smells like Mom's cooking." Ethan shot back, "Don't use memories you abandoned." The living room felt both familiar and foreign, old photos hanging crooked on faded wallpaper. Daniel's eyes landed on one photo, Ethan at graduation, alone, his smile tight and brittle. He swallowed hard and said, "I should have been there." Ethan's voice cracked, though his anger stayed sharp. "But you weren't." Daniel felt the years collapse onto his shoulders like bricks. He thought of the man Ethan had to become without him. Daniel whispered, "I want to carry some of that weight now." Ethan turned his back, muttering, "You don't get to choose when." The house groaned in silence, every creak echoing resentment. Daniel sat slowly on the old couch, its cushions sagging under forgotten years. He said, "I left because I was drowning. I thought disappearing would save us both." Ethan leaned against the wall, his arms crossed like a barricade. He said, "You saved yourself, not me." Daniel's voice cracked, "I carried shame every day." Ethan's eyes flashed, "Shame didn't tuck me in. Shame didn't keep me safe." The room filled with the ghosts of their childhood, late nights waiting for footsteps that never came. Daniel whispered, "I wanted to come back sooner, but I was afraid of your eyes." Ethan's jaw tightened, but a flicker of pain broke through his anger. Daniel said, "I can't erase the past, but I can show up now." The silence stretched like a rope pulled tight, daring one of them to let go first. Ethan paced, his footsteps sharp against the creaking floorboards. He said, "Do you even know what it cost me? Every door slammed because they knew my brother walked out." Daniel lowered his head, whispering, "I thought leaving kept you safe." Ethan's laugh was bitter, cutting through the room like glass. "Safe? You left me with silence, with pity, with nothing." Daniel rose, his voice steadier now. "I'm here to give back what I stole, your trust, your brother." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Trust isn't returned, it's rebuilt." Daniel felt the words sink deep, heavier than chains. He said, "Then I'll rebuild brick by brick, even if it takes the rest of my life." The room crackled with tension, two men bound by blood yet broken by choices. Daniel placed the envelope on the table between them, like an offering. He whispered, "This letter holds the words I couldn't say." Ethan stared at it, his jaw tightening as though it might bite. He said, "Words can't undo years." Daniel's voice broke, "No, but maybe they can begin." Ethan leaned closer, his eyes burning with the ache of betrayal. He said, "If I read this, you'll owe me more than words." Daniel nodded. "Then I'll give you proof, not promises." The room grew unbearably quiet, the air thick with the weight of a brotherhood on trial. Ethan's hand hovered above the letter, trembling with hesitation, as if touching it would reopen every scar. Daniel whispered, "Please, let this be the first step." The envelope sat untouched as Ethan said, "One letter won't erase years of empty chairs." Daniel's voice shook, "Then let me start with actions." Ethan crossed his arms tighter, his eyes searching Daniel's face for cracks. The air felt charged, every word sparking like flint. Daniel said, "I'll prove I've changed, even if it means crawling through fire." Ethan muttered, "Words again." Daniel's chest heaved, the silence pressing heavier than stone. He thought of rent unpaid, jobs lost, nights he drowned in bottles instead of facing his brother. Ethan's voice hardened. "You left me with bills, with pity, with nothing but echoes." Daniel said, "I can work, I can show up. I can give what I failed to before." Ethan's stare was ice, but beneath it flickered a wound, fragile and raw. Daniel whispered, "Please, give me one door to knock on that doesn't shut." Ethan looked away, whispering low, "Doors don't open easy when they've been slammed too many times." Daniel rose from the couch and said, "Let me take some weight off your shoulders." Ethan replied coldly, "My shoulders got strong without you." Daniel clenched his fists, whispering, "But they shouldn't have carried it alone." Ethan stepped closer, eyes burning with years of betrayal. He said, Where were you when the lights got cut, when the fridge went empty, when I begged for help? Daniel's throat tightened. I was drowning in my own shame, too blind to see yours. Ethan shook his head. That's not blindness, that's choice. Daniel pressed his palm against the envelope on the table and whispered, I want to be more than regret. The silence grew thick, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Ethan finally said, prove it. But know this, I'll be watching every step. Morning broke through dusty curtains, pale light cutting across the room. Ethan said, if you want to help, get up early like the rest of us. Daniel nodded, weary but determined. He muttered, I'll earn your trust with sweat. Ethan tossed him an old work jacket saying, don't think this makes us brothers again. Daniel slipped it on, sleeves too tight, fabric smelling of grease and long shifts. He whispered, it's a start. Ethan eyed him, testing, judging, waiting for cracks to show. Daniel felt the weight of every clock tick, each second demanding proof instead of apology. Ethan finally said, be ready at dawn tomorrow, no excuses. Daniel met his gaze and replied softly, I'll be there before the sun. The next dawn, Daniel walked beside Ethan down cracked sidewalks, cold air stinging his lungs. Ethan said, keep up, or don't bother coming again. Daniel quickened his pace, sweat breaking despite the chill. His boots scuffed gravel, echoing against silence. Daniel whispered, I'll match you step for step. Ethan smirked bitterly, we'll see. They passed neighbors who eyed Daniel with suspicion, whispers rising like smoke. Daniel's chest burned, not from the walk, but from the stares that remembered his absence. Ethan said, that's your shadow. They don't forget either. Daniel kept his eyes forward, whispering, then I'll show them who I am now, not who I was. Ethan's silence was heavier than words, his pace relentless, his eyes sharp. Daniel followed, each stride a vow etched into the pavement. At the job site, the foreman frowned when Ethan brought Daniel forward. Another mouth, he asked. Ethan said firmly, he pulls his weight or he leaves. Daniel stood tall, whispering, I'll prove myself. The foreman handed him heavy tools, their weight biting into his palms. Daniel lifted them without complaint, though his muscles screamed. Ethan crossed his arms, watching silently, testing without mercy. Daniel's breath came heavy, his body straining under labor he hadn't done in years. Sweat poured, dripping onto cracked concrete, but he refused to falter. Ethan finally said, don't expect applause. Daniel whispered, I don't. Just a chance. The clang of tools and the silence of judgment merged into one, a rhythm Daniel vowed to endure until Ethan believed. The foreman dismissed them for a break, and Ethan pulled Daniel aside. He said, you think sweat erases what you did? Daniel whispered, no, but it proves I can stay. Ethan's glare burned sharp, then softened as he muttered, you don't know half the truth. Daniel frowned, then tell me. Ethan's jaw clenched, eyes flicking away. He whispered, the night you left, Dad threw me out too. I wasn't abandoned by one man, but by two. Daniel staggered, breath catching. He said, I thought leaving spared you his anger. Ethan shook his head, your leaving made me his target. Daniel's chest caved with guilt, the ground under his feet suddenly hollow. He whispered, all this time I thought you hated me for leaving. You hate me because I made you stay. Ethan turned his back, voice shaking though his words cut sharp. He said, while you ran, I took every hit, every insult. I became the shield you left behind. Daniel's voice cracked. I thought disappearing meant saving us. Ethan faced him, eyes glistening, whispering, no, it meant sacrificing me. Daniel felt his knees weaken, the weight of truth anchoring him. He said, I've carried guilt for years, but not this guilt. This is heavier. Ethan's anger broke into a bitter laugh. You thought the story was yours alone. It was mine to survive. Daniel pressed his hand against the cold wall, whispering, then I owe you more than words. I owe you my life rebuilt at your side. Ethan's silence spoke louder than rage, the truth slicing between them like glass. Daniel sat on a concrete block, his body heavy as lead. He whispered, "I left to escape him, but I chained you to him instead." Ethan crossed his arms, his face both stern and wounded. He said, "Every bruise, every insult, every night I cursed your name." Daniel looked up with hollow eyes, whispering, "I deserve the curse." Ethan stepped closer, voice trembling. "I wanted you to come back, even while I hated you." Daniel's lips parted, his voice low, "I never stopped being your brother." Ethan laughed bitterly, whispering, "You stopped when you walked away." Daniel clenched the envelope in his pocket, whispering, "Maybe the letter was never for you. Maybe it was for me to finally face the truth." Ethan's eyes narrowed, but his silence held more pain than anger. Daniel whispered, "I thought running made me strong. But staying made you stronger than I'll ever be." Ethan's eyes flickered with both pride and sorrow. He said, "Strength isn't something I wanted. It was survival." Daniel nodded, his voice steady, "And I'll carry survival with you now." Ethan's stare sharpened. "Why now? Why after all these years?" Daniel said, "Because silence grew louder than my heartbeat. I couldn't breathe without trying to make this right." Ethan looked away, his voice low, "You're not the only one who suffocated." Daniel stepped closer, whispering, "Then let's learn to breathe again together." Ethan's silence stretched long, his jaw set but his eyes softening like cracks in stone. The bell rang, calling them back to work, but neither moved. Ethan said quietly, "You want a second chance. It costs more than sweat, more than letters. It costs the truth, every ugly piece." Daniel nodded. "Then I'll bleed honesty if that's what it takes." Ethan's voice cracked. "Truth isn't confession alone. It's proof you'll stay when staying hurts." Daniel whispered, "Then I'll stay, even if it breaks me." Ethan studied him long, the silence like a verdict delayed. His voice softened, almost unwilling. "We'll see if you mean it." Daniel whispered, "I'll prove it every dawn." Ethan looked away, his face shadowed, but a flicker of something, hope or fear, glimmered in his eyes. The night returned heavy and still as Daniel followed Ethan into the house. Ethan stood near the table, eyes sharp. He said, "It's time you stop hiding behind letters." Daniel placed the envelope on the table once more, his hands trembling. He whispered, "Then hear it from me." Ethan's gaze burned, demanding, daring. Daniel inhaled, chest rising like a man ready for execution. He said, "I left not because I stopped loving you, but because I thought love meant letting you live without my wreckage." Ethan's voice shook. "Love doesn't abandon. Love fights. You ran." Daniel's words cracked. "I was a coward. I confess it. Every day I chose silence was another betrayal." Ethan slammed his hand on the table, voice breaking, "Then confess to my face, not to paper." Daniel whispered, "I left my brother, and I've carried that grave every day." Daniel rose from his chair, voice trembling but steadying with each word. He said, "I was selfish, terrified, broken. I left you to bear storms that should have been mine too." Ethan's face twisted, torn between fury and grief. He whispered, "Do you know how many nights I cursed your name?" Daniel nodded, tears brimming, "And I cursed myself louder." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You chose your freedom over my chains." Daniel stepped closer, whispering, "I chose wrong. I see that now. If redemption costs my pride, take it all." Ethan's silence carved deep, his eyes searching Daniel's soul for proof. Daniel whispered again, "This is not excuse. This is truth." Ethan's lips pressed tight, his breath heavy as though the weight of 15 years collapsed into this room. Ethan turned away, pacing like a storm caged in walls. He said, "Confession doesn't erase scars." Daniel replied softly, "No, but maybe it helps them breathe." Ethan stopped, fists clenched. He whispered, "You don't know how many times I wished you were dead, because it was easier than imagining you alive and gone." Daniel's breath caught, his chest tight. He said, "Then hate me if you must, but let me still try." Ethan's shoulders dropped, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Daniel whispered, "Because I was afraid the door would never open." Silence thickened, both men trapped in a history neither could change. Daniel said, "Tonight I choose the harder road. To stand here, to face you, to bear your anger until it turns into something else." Ethan's eyes glistened, though he refused to let tears fall. Daniel stepped forward, voice firm for the first time. He said, "I am guilty, but I'm also here. If staying costs me my dignity, then I'll pay. If proving means bleeding, then I'll bleed." Ethan froze, breath catching. He whispered, "Don't promise what you can't keep." Daniel said, "I promise what I'll live, not just speak." Ethan's eyes softened for the briefest second, then hardened again. He said, "Show me, don't tell me." Daniel nodded. "I will, day after day, until the shadow is gone." Ethan studied him, the silence sharp as a blade. He whispered, "If you fail, you don't just lose me again, you bury us both." Daniel's lips tightened, his voice steady. "Then I won't fail." The room seemed to shrink as Ethan finally lowered into a chair, his voice weary. He said, "I don't forgive you. Not yet." Daniel sat across, whispering, "I didn't come for forgiveness. I came for truth." Ethan looked up, eyes sharp. "Then live it." Daniel nodded, whispering, "I will." Silence lingered heavy, but it was different now. Less like chains, more like soil broken open. Ethan's shoulders slumped, the years of burden bending him. He muttered, "You want a second chance? Earn it." Daniel whispered, "Every dawn, every night, I'll earn it." The air shifted, not softened, but changed, like a storm breaking but leaving the ground wet and raw. Both men sat across from each other, not reconciled, but no longer enemies. Morning light spilled into the kitchen as Daniel brewed coffee for the first time in Ethan's house. He whispered, "Small steps every day." Ethan entered, silent, his eyes wary but less hostile. Daniel set a mug on the table and said, "I remember how you take it. Black, no sugar." Ethan paused, staring at the steam, then muttered, "You remember more than I thought." Daniel sat across from him, shoulders straight. He said, "I can't fix the past, but I can be here for the present." Ethan sipped slowly, his face unreadable. The silence stretched, but it wasn't sharp. It was tentative, fragile, like a bridge being built one plank at a time. Daniel whispered, "This is where it starts, showing up, staying, not running." Ethan didn't reply, but he didn't leave the table either. Later that week, Daniel walked with Ethan through the neighborhood, carrying groceries. Neighbors whispered, some nodding, others glaring. Ethan said, "They don't forget." Daniel nodded, whispering, "Then I'll let them watch me change." Ethan adjusted the bag on his arm, his expression guarded. He muttered, "They'll judge every step." Daniel replied, "Good, let them, every step is proof." A child waved shyly from a porch, and Daniel managed a small smile, but the parent pulled the child inside quickly. Ethan's jaw tightened, whispering, "That's the shadow you cast." Daniel whispered back, "Then I'll keep walking until the shadow breaks." Ethan didn't answer, but he didn't stop walking beside him. The silence between them felt less like a wall, more like cautious ground being tested. That night, Daniel repaired a broken fence in Ethan's yard. His hands blistered, sweat dripping, but he worked until the boards were steady. Ethan stood at the porch watching silently. Daniel said, "Every nail is a piece of proof." Ethan replied, "Proof doesn't erase." Daniel hammered harder, whispering, "No, but it builds." The sound of each strike echoed into the night like a vow. Daniel's back ached, his palms raw, but he didn't stop. Ethan finally said, "You'll wear yourself out." Daniel breathed hard, whispering, "Better worn out from fixing than from running." Ethan's face softened faintly, his eyes carrying both pain and reluctant respect. The fence stood straighter, not perfect but standing, like their bond, scarred but holding. The following morning, Ethan placed his boots on the floor, looked at Daniel, and said, "Work starts early. Don't make me regret trusting you." Daniel tied his laces quickly, whispering, "You want." They walked side by side down the cracked street, their shadows stretching long in dawn's light. Daniel thought, "Every step beside him is a step away from who I was." Ethan's face stayed unreadable, but his pace slowed just enough to match Daniel's stride. A neighbor called out Ethan's name, ignoring Daniel completely. Ethan kept walking, glancing sideways only once, his eyes holding questions instead of accusations. Daniel whispered, "I'll answer those with time." Ethan didn't respond, but his silence felt less like rejection, more like a test in progress. That evening, Daniel sat alone at the table, staring at the envelope still unopened by Ethan. He whispered, "Maybe the words don't matter anymore." Ethan entered, leaning against the doorway. He said, "They matter. Just not enough on their own." Daniel looked up, surprised, and whispered, "Then why keep it?" Ethan walked closer, eyes heavy but calmer. He said, "Because it reminds me that you showed up, even if late." Daniel's breath caught, whispering, "Does that mean I have a place here?" Ethan sighed, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. He said, "It means you have work to do, and I'll let you try." Daniel nodded, his heart heavy but alive. In that moment, resentment bent just slightly, making room for the smallest flicker of love. The rain fell steady that night, streaking the windows as Daniel sat across from Ethan at the table. Daniel whispered, "I've confessed. I've worked. I've stayed. What else must I give?" Ethan leaned back, his eyes tired but steady. He said, "Time. That's the price, and consistency." Daniel nodded, whispering, "Then I'll pay in full." Ethan's gaze lingered, searching Daniel's face for lies, and finding only exhaustion. He said, "You're still here, and that counts more than words." Daniel whispered, "I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after." Ethan exhaled slowly, his jaw softening as though the storm inside him was finally beginning to fade. The rain tapped like a heartbeat against the glass, a rhythm of something fragile but alive. The next morning, Ethan watched as Daniel carried tools into the yard before sunrise. Daniel whispered, "Every dawn, a new chance." Ethan followed him, arms crossed, but his expression less harsh than before. He said, "You're learning." Daniel smiled faintly, sweat already forming as he worked. He said, "I'm not learning. I'm remembering what it means to stay." Ethan stood near the fence Daniel repaired days earlier, his eyes scanning the boards. He whispered, still standing. Daniel's hands blistered, but he hammered another nail with steady rhythm. He whispered, "And so am I." Ethan remained silent, but his presence felt less like judgment, more like witness. The early sun bathed them both in pale gold, painting shadows that stretched long but not unbroken. That evening, Ethan opened the envelope at last. Daniel froze, his breath held tight. Ethan read in silence, eyes scanning shaky handwriting. His lips pressed together, emotions shifting like storms. He whispered, "Every word drips guilt." Daniel whispered, "Because every day was guilt." Ethan looked up, his eyes wet but steady. He said, "You owned it. No excuses." Daniel nodded, whispering, "No excuses, only truth." Ethan set the letter down, his fingers trembling. He said, "Then truth is where we start." Daniel's chest rose, heavy with relief, whispering, "Even if forgiveness never comes, this was enough." Ethan's voice broke softer. "Maybe forgiveness isn't the point. Maybe survival together is." Silence fell, not heavy this time, but like soil ready for seed. Later, they stood at their father's grave in the old cemetery. Rain had stopped, leaving the earth damp and heavy. Ethan whispered, "This is where everything broke." Daniel's eyes dropped to the stone. He said, "And where I abandoned you most." Ethan's voice shook. "He cast me out the night you left." Daniel whispered, "And I never came back to fight for you." Ethan placed a hand on the cold stone, whispering, I carried him alone. Daniel placed his hand beside Ethan's, whispering, "Now I carry with you." Ethan glanced sideways, his eyes softer. He said, "We can't fix him, but maybe we can fix us." Daniel whispered, "That's all I want." The grave stayed silent, but the air felt lighter. That night, they sat together in silence on the porch, listening to the crickets. Ethan finally said, "I don't forgive you yet. But I don't hate you anymore." Daniel's chest tightened, his eyes wet. He whispered, "That's more than I deserve." Ethan leaned back, staring at the night sky. He said, "Second chances aren't free. You'll keep paying." Daniel nodded, whispering, "And I will. Every day." Ethan's voice grew softer. "We start here, not clean, but real." Daniel whispered, "Then real is enough." The night air carried their words into the dark, a fragile truce stitched with truth. Ethan glanced at him once, eyes tired but alive. Daniel whispered, "I can forgive you. Can you live with that?"